Welcome back to the Banking on Digital Growth podcast. My goodness, it feels so good to say that because, it has been a while since I have said that. That's because I've taken the past 4 months off. You see, since early 2020, I have recorded almost 500 episodes of the Banking on Digital Growth podcast. In fact, when I launched this podcast, the world was in a very different place. If you recall, COVID just shut down the world back in early 2020, and I was getting ready to publish my first book, Banking on Digital Growth. That would go on to become an instant #1 bestseller. So when the world is shutting down and all the conferences that I was scheduled to speak at on my book launch tour are getting canceled, I went into the Gap. I was griping about problems like I wrote about in Banking on Change, but my wife challenged me. She challenged me to think even bigger, and as a result, I started this podcast with a single purpose. I wanted to help banks and credit unions level up their digital growth. And if I think back, and when I was prepping for this comeback, I want to give a big shout out to Jim Marous because he was my first guest. He was my first victim going all the way back to May 5th, 2020. And as of recording, when I think about time, it is May 8th, 2025. So it's literally been almost 5 years since Jim joined me for that very first interview. And since that time, we have unlocked, we have captured, we've amplified the wisdom of hundreds of financial brand leaders from around the world. It's also been good to get Audrey Kanata, she's our operations lead here, to get her out of her comfort zone to join me for dozens of episodes to talk about things that are important to her, to talk about the books that she's read, that I've read, that we've read together, to talk about the website secret shopping studies that she has run and facilitated, to share the insights that she has gained by becoming a certified Colby consultant. And as a result, the discipline, if you will, the discipline to do this show, to show up, to share 2 shows every week from early 2020 through really January of 2025, the Banking on Digital Growth podcast, according to Listen Notes, I'm going to quote them, is one of the top 5% most popular shows in the entire world out of 3,556,913 podcasts globally. Now, I share all of this with you to thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Thank you for continuing to want to grow. But I have to be honest with you, because after recording almost 500 episodes of this podcast, I got tired. I burned out. And truthfully, I was just growing frustrated. Not with the podcast per se, but I was growing frustrated with the banking industry as a whole. And much of this frustration came from the reflection that I did when I was writing Banking on Change. And that book, once again, I think time is interesting. That book, my second book, was published a year ago this month in May of 2024. And like my first book, Banking on Change also became an instant #1 bestseller. You see, when I started thinking about the 23 years that I have invested helping banks and credit unions uncover and eliminate blind spots in their digital buying journeys, I started to just get frustrated because what I see and what I saw from my perspective when it comes to digital growth, when it comes to change, to transformation, is there's a lot of talk in this industry. There's a lot of talk. I talk a lot, conferences, this podcast, other people talk, but there's a lot of talk in boardrooms. There's a lot of talk in meetings, but there's not that much action. And that was starting to wear on me personally. For example, let's go back to the conference idea. I was recently speaking at an industry conference. I've spoken at this event every year for 10 years. That's a decade of my life. And I think it's because I was thinking about the context of time. I'd invested a decade of my life. That's 25% of my life, basically. And I finally had the courage to tell the truth of what I see in front of hundreds of people. And so I looked around the room, and there were people in this room, and I told them, I said, look, you're 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old right now, but you've already died. And maybe that's you. Maybe you're listening to this podcast right now. You're 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. You've already died. But you're just waiting another 30 or 40 years to get buried. The number of comments, the text, the DMs that I got after that session blew me away. Because I had everyone in that session, and you can do this right now. Get a piece of paper, and I want you to write 8 boxes on this paper. Side by side. 1 box, 1 box, 1 box, 1 box, 1 box. 8 boxes side by side. And for every year that you have been alive, I want you to shade in one of those boxes. So for example, if you've been alive for 30 years, shade in 3 boxes. If it's 35, shade in 3.5 boxes. If you've been alive for 50 years, shade in 5. If you've been alive for 65, shade in 6.5 boxes. Because like I shared in this conference, I want to share it with you. The number of unshaded boxes, that's the number of years you have left roughly on an 80-year lifespan. My question is, are you doing what you need to do? Because what I said in that session and what I'm sharing with you right now, I've said dozens of times before on this podcast, all transformation that leads to future growth starts by telling the truth. And I want to tell you the truth. I was lying to myself. I wasn't being honest with myself. If I'm not being honest with myself, I'm not being honest with you. I've also been down this road before as an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for 23 years. And I can tell you when I start lying to myself, historically, it was probably one of the worst years of my life, 2012. I've told this story before on this podcast. That was the year that my wife came to me and said, it's the family or the business. You got to make a choice. Because when you're not telling yourself the truth, when I'm not telling myself the truth, I can tell you firsthand, this is where the conflict creeps in. For me, it was a conflict with myself, conflict with my wife, conflict with my kids, conflict with my team, conflict with my clients. And that's why I had to hit the pause button on this podcast for the past few months. Because I had to start telling the truth. I had to start telling myself the truth. And not just telling the truth, I had to start taking action. And the truth is, I felt I was being called to launch a second business. A business to help other entrepreneurs level up their businesses. In fact, this is something I had been thinking about since the idea first came back into my mind all the way back in July of 2021. The problem was I simply did not have the courage to launch this new business. Like many banks and credit unions that I've worked with, that I've coached directly, I became trapped in my own cave of complacency. I became trapped in the cave of complacency that I wrote about in Banking on Change. So if you're sitting here and you're struggling with change, if you're sitting here feeling a little bit lost, a little bit confused, a little bit frustrated, a little bit overwhelmed with all the changes that we've experienced over the past 5 years, you're not alone. The more that I'm honest about the situation of personally where I'm at, the more people are texting me, writing me, DMing me, that they're feeling something very similar right now. In fact, there's someone that I know who sent me a text, and I was like, I got to make a change. And I was like, let's talk about it. And if that's you, let's talk about it. Because in early February, we launched Level Up Business to help other B2B entrepreneurs turn video content into best-selling books. Now, I do see an opportunity to collaborate with other banks and credit unions to work together to help entrepreneurs in their communities, in your communities, level up and elevate through entrepreneur roundtables, through workshops. But that's a conversation for another day, because today I am excited. I am energized to not just get back into hosting the Banking on Digital Growth podcast, but to welcome a co-host to co-host the podcast with me. It's my friend Derek Krause. Derek is the co-founder of Metrify with Ryan Harmon, and both Derek and Ryan, They too have invested the last decade of their life working with financial brands to build websites that sell using many of the same exact strategies that I wrote about in Banking on Digital Growth. And over the past 6 months, we have gotten to know each other very well. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, Derek, Ryan, myself, my wife, we were all hanging out together at an entrepreneurial event. And my wife told me, she was like, I like Derek and Ryan. These are two good guys. And they are. And so the more that we talked, the more we saw an opportunity to collaborate, the more we saw an opportunity to co-create value for banks and credit unions together. And the more I saw this opportunity, the more I got excited about the future of the industry again, because of how Metrify makes it so easy for banks and credit unions to eliminate the digital journey blind spots that I've been talking about, that we've been speaking about, that I've been writing about, to eliminate these blind spots on their websites that are costing banks and credit unions millions in loans and deposits. And that's why, as I start to wrap up here, getting back in the saddle, and on the next episode, Derek will be joining me. But first, I want to invite you. I want to invite you to come along as we embark on this next chapter of the Banking on Digital Growth podcast. And to get things started back up, I also want to invite you to text me right now. Get out your phone, text me, 415-579-3002. First and foremost, text me if you feel like you're struggling right now. If you're in marketing, if you're in sales, if you're in leadership at a financial brand, and you're struggling when it comes to change. Because 2020 brought on the change of COVID. But now we're in a whole new era, the age of AI. I wrote about this in Banking on Change. So you're not alone, number one. Like I said before, I'm getting a lot of people reaching out to me about this. Number two, I want to invite you to text me, 415-579-3002, because we have a new website benchmark that shows you how your website compares to other banks and credit unions. In fact, in just 3 minutes, you get instant clarity on where loans and deposits that you have today, or you might not have today, may be slipping through the cracks because you have gaps, because you have blind spots in your buying journeys on your websites. But you're going to be able to figure out what you can do to take action, to eliminate those gaps, to eliminate those blind spots. So text me right now, 832-240-1922, because we have a new website benchmark that's going to show you how your website compares to other banks and credit unions. In just 3 minutes, you're going to get instant clarity into where loans and deposits might be slipping through the cracks because you have unseen gaps, you have unseen blind spots. So text me right now, 832-240-1922, so that you can benchmark your website, get quick clarity to increase your loan and deposit growth, all without the pain of having to build an entire new website.